is now set down for debate and will be voted upon at a later sitting day. Secretary General.
The Honourable Acting Prime Minister and Minister for Finance to move the second reading of a bill for an act to appropriate a sum of $3,090,840,320 for ordinary services of government for the year ending 31st December 2016, Bill number 23 of 2015.
Thank you. I now call upon the Honourable Acting Prime Minister and Minister for Finance to move the second reading.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move that a bill for an act to appropriate a sum of $3,090,840,320 for ordinary services of government for the year ending 31 December 2016, which is Bill number 23 of 2015, be read a second time. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Madam Speaker, I beg to second the motion.
I now call on the Honourable Acting Prime Minister and Minister for Finance for his second reading speech, if any.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I know we're all waiting with bated breath to hear the Honourable Leader of NFP to give his right to reply, and therefore I will reserve my right to speak at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor is now open for debate, and we will follow the batting order, which has been agreed to by the party whips. We will start with the Honourable Dr. Biman Prasad. As agreed to in the Business Committee, he may speak for the same amount of time as taken by the Honourable Attorney General and Minister for Finance. I now call upon the Honourable Dr. Biman Prasad.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I reply to the Budget 2016, I wish to convey our best wishes to our former President, Ratu Ipeli Nailatikau, and Andi Koila Mara, and hope life after Government House will be fruitful and rewarding in all their endeavours. I also extend our well wishes to the new President, His Excellency Georgie Conrote, and First Lady Sarote Conrote. We are hopeful that the reservoir of goodwill and wisdom our new President accumulated during his distinguished career will greatly assist him in his most important role of being a symbol of unity for our nation. Madam Speaker, I would also like to join other honourable members to add our heartfelt commendations to the Fijiana team for the sterling performance yesterday for qualifying for the Rio Olympics. In adding to the Leader of the Opposition statement on Saturday, may I also add our thoughts of profound sympathy for the people of France and extend to them our solidarity and hopes of fortitude and resolve as a nation. The power of humanity always prevails over fear and tyranny, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I thank the Honourable Minister of Finance for his budget address. We know, Madam Speaker, that the formulation of a budget always requires hard work and the input of a lot of people. And I want to thank all the civil servants, staff from the Ministry of Finance who have contributed towards its formulation. Madam Speaker, I have called this budget a deceptive budget of a confused government. It has no clear theme or direction. It is all over the place or a political merry-go-round. VAT is reduced, but the poorest will pay more VAT. Last year, the government increased incentives for the tourism industry. Now it has taken them away. Last year, the government increased duties on luxury items. Now it has reduced them again. 1 year after vehicle imports were relaxed, they are now to be tightened. What is happening, Madam Speaker? To put it simply, this budget is consistently inconsistent with government's proposals, promises, objectives, and targeted outputs. The Honourable Minister says that this budget is for a strong Fiji, a fair Fiji, a healthy Fiji. Last year, his budget was supposed to be turning promises into deeds. Madam Speaker, all politicians use slogans to promote their policies. But I'm afraid this politician seems to be doing things the other way around. and the Orwellian opposite is the truth reigns in this case. He seems to be using his policies to promote his slogans, buzzwords, taglines, and indeed in a typical fashion of an over-energetic salesperson. But a budget is not about drama and theatrics. Madam Speaker, my lawyer friends tell me that the Honorable the Attorney General and Minister of Finance is a much better politician than he is a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not in a position to judge that. But I'm certainly in a position to judge his economic skills. And I can assure this House that he is certainly a better politician than he is an economist. In his speech, the Minister said that the budget is more than money in, money out, Madam Speaker. That is correct. A budget is an important policy instrument. It should tell the people, the business community and other stakeholders in the economy about what the government is planning and where the government is heading. Economic policy should be clear and consistent. In that way, the nation can plan ahead, work together, achieve long-term economic growth. But this budget, aside from its slogans and rhetoric, signals nothing more than a government that is making things up as it goes along. A politician's budget speech, Madam Speaker, can make big promises with billions of dollars. But the real question is whether he or she can deliver those promises. The minister's last budget was called turning promises into deeds. But just how many of his promises has the Minister of Finance turned into deeds? Dramatic statements about the economy made in this House is not manifesting to what our people out there watching this debate feel in their pockets, Madam Speaker. A budget must not just look forward and promise. It must look back to what has been achieved, and I'll come back to that. A good budget process. Let me start by talking about the budget process and its formulation. A national budget is a central political process in any country, Madam Speaker. Countries have different ways of formulating them. However, before we look forward to the next budget, we must have the information of our past financial performance. Businessmen have an old saying, if you can't measure, you can't manage. If we cannot measure where we have been, how can we manage where we are going? And before the budget is formulated and presented to Parliament, these are some of the things we need to know. First, what was the performance against the budget of the past year, that is 2014? And what has been the performance against the budget for at least the first 6 months in the current year, that is 2015? This would allow Parliament to understand how well the government has performed on its earlier budget promises. How else can we believe whether it will really turn promises into deeds? Under the 2004 Finance Management Act and regulations, the Minister of Finance must table in Parliament the quarterly appropriation statements and the mid-fiscal year statement within 2 months of the end of those periods. This data used to be a regular feature on the Ministry of Finance website, but no longer there. Quite troubling, however, is that the Minister of Finance missed all those deadlines, and what has been tabled for the first time at the last sitting is really a poor reproduction. On 21st May 2007, the Financial Management Act Amendment promulgation changed the Act and required reporting by the Minister to Cabinet. However, Madam Speaker, the promulgation also stated it expires on the date of the next sitting of the House of Representatives. And all amendments made were to be nullified. Therefore, the Minister must comply with the reporting provisions of the Act in entirety and in a timely manner. Next, Madam Speaker, each budget sector, that is the departments and ministries, must prepare and make publicly available for each financial year an annual report which must be tabled in the House of Representatives. This report must demonstrate the agency's performance during the year, include its financial statements, include other information required by the financial instructions. Madam Speaker, in many of the annual reports I've seen this past year that was tabled in the House, and I've been overwhelmed by staged glossy pictures struggling to tell a story, but underwhelmed by the facts of the stories themselves, which is how have the people's taxes positively impacted their lives and livelihoods. Similar accountability requirements are prescribed for off-budget side entities, that is commercial statutory bodies and government commercial companies under regulations 51 to 53, Madam Speaker. Most budget sector agencies have failed to do this, and this cannot be allowed to continue, Madam Speaker. The Minister and the Prime Minister talk about transparency and accountability all the time. Indeed, if you listen to them long enough, you would believe that they invented the idea. But if the Minister is truly as transparent and accountable as his rhetoric, he would tell us about how well his government has performed on financial management and reporting. He has a chance to reply in this debate, and I challenge him to tell Parliament in that reply which of his budget sector agencies have reported, which have not, and which statutory bodies and government companies have reported and which have not. It is not just government spending that is important. Information and statistics are also important. If we cannot measure important aspects of our economic performance, how can we build good economic policies? The government has given a bigger budget allocation to the Bureau of Statistics, and that's welcome. It is quite frankly more critical, however, that the Bureau be left alone and independent so the nation, especially taxpayers who foot the bill, can receive honest and accurate information, whether that information is good or bad. We know that the Bureau of Statistics has not released the information from its household income expenditure survey of 2 years ago, including the number of households now living in poverty. We know that the information is available. Why are we not being given that information? Is it because it doesn't suit the government's slogans? How can meaningful policies be made for the poorest people of Fiji if we do not know who they are, where they are, and how many they are, or even how poor they are, Madam Speaker? In a modern budget process, government policies should not be a surprise. In a well-run economy, there will have been signaled months or even years before. Economic policies will change very little because the policymakers will have a long-term plan and they'll stick to it. The word to describe such an approach is a favorite word of the Minister, is transparent. But this government's budget process, secretive, surprising, full of U-turns, is the opposite of transparent. Trust, openness, transparency and accountability, Madam Speaker. The Honourable Minister of Finance talked about government believing in our people. Mighty fine words. But it works both ways. People must also believe in the government. We are constantly told that we now have true democracy. The Minister speaks about true democracy as if he invented it. True democracy is not about how people vote once every 4 years. It is about how the government accounts to people during the whole of 4 years. This, however, is a government feared by the people, Madam Speaker. Nobody is willing to criticize the government without first lowering their voices and looking over their shoulders. I mentioned this in my budget process last year, and not a lot has changed. We are told that there is an equal citizenry. But if the army stops the police from arresting a soldier suspected of a crime, is that equal citizenry? Regrettably, this government has created a fear, a culture of fear, secretiveness, arrogance, and mistrust that is now pervasive in Fiji. Madam Speaker, we have become a low-trust country. I could not help but feel sadness at the tone of the budget address. The Minister lectured business people and accountants as though they were crooks. Now he wants to look inside every supermarket cash register. He's threatening business people who do not pass on VAT reductions to consumers with fines and imprisonment. Is this a government which believes in people? It appears that this government only believes in... Madam Speaker.
Order. I'm having trouble in hearing the Honourable Member. Please just tone
Madam
down
Speaker,
on your interjections.
The Honourable Minister of Finance will have his right of reply, so he should listen to me.
Order.
It appears...
Order. Order.
It appears
Order. You have many times been very personal in the way you address. Please address the issue and not an honourable member.
it's about the budget, Madam Speaker.
Yeah, budget, but not the member.
It appears that this government only believes in people who do not answer back. In his budget speech, the minister constantly talked about what previous governments had done and what needed to be reformed. However, he has conveniently forgotten that for the past 10 years, his government has been in power. He complains that previous government inaction means Fiji has no surgeons. But what has his military government done about that since 2007? The minister says there is a need to reform how the government buys and looks after medicines and medical supplies. But that reform, Madam Speaker, was announced with great fanfare a few years ago by the then minister in that government. What kind of message does the government send when a senior government minister becomes ill? The preference is for the super private hospital over a public hospital. Madam Speaker, what we need is not only economic credibility and consistent policies, but equally crucial is political credibility. Political credibility is earned through building trust and confidence in every sector of the society. This trust will come through openness, transparency, and respect for different views and criticisms of government policy. This, Madam Speaker, has been absent in Fiji even after the elections. The government has accumulated its control over the media, and its constitutional promises of free speech are still empty because it will not repeal the draconian media decree. Civil servants, Madam Speaker, are too afraid to use their intellect to make decisions for fear of being sacked. When the police commissioner tries to do his duty and prosecute soldiers accused of torture, he is challenged and forced from office. Madam Speaker, unless we create an environment conducive to open debate, disagreements.
Point of order.
Madam, Order 62 Rule 4, the leader of NFP is not speaking on the budget. He's gone outside the scope of the budget, talking of the military. He's made improper motive against he's made improper motive against the Attorney General. Listen to me. It's a point of order. He said in this Parliament a while ago that some lawyers have told him that AG, Attorney General, is not a good lawyer. I challenge him to name the lawyers because it's an offence under the legal practitioner's decree. And I challenge you to name the lawyers and we'll take them to task. Now he's speaking outside the budget, Madam Speaker. He's wasting the time. We, the whips, have agreed on a timeline. If he continues on doing that, we will never finish the budget.
Sorry, Madam Speaker. The Honourable Nanindalo, I heard her call the whip of the government a fool. Is that parliamentary language, Madam Speaker?
Can you withdraw that word if you had said it?
I withdraw. I don't want to offend
Thank
fools.
you.
Excuse me, Madam Speaker. Just listen to her apology, Madam Speaker, with due respect. She said, I withdraw that because I don't want to insult the fools. That is not an apology, Madam Speaker. She is taking us for a joke.
Thank you. Order. Honourable Randala, can you just repeat what you just said?
I withdraw unconditionally. Can I now speak to the point of order, Madam Speaker?
I only asked you to withdraw. You don't have to question that withdrawal again. But
No,
you
no,
have withdrawn.
I've withdrawn
I have heard.
unconditionally.
Thank you. You may take your seat.
And now I'm rising on a point of order. Has he completed?
He has not finished.
Yes, Madam, my point of order was that the leader of NFP, the interjection was calling me a fool, which is, it speaks of the caliber of the speaker, but then the leader of NFP has gone outside the bounds. The whips had agreed to finish. The whips had agreed to finish this debate by.
Thank you. Your point is clear. Thank you. Your point is clear. The point is that you're going outside of the issue, which is the budget. Please do not bring in the Commissioner of Police into your budget statement.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
With order, there is a point of order from the Honourable Rani Dalu. Can we hear that point of order?
It's, Madam Speaker, the discussion of, I think the Honourable Shadow Minister for Finance. He's a spokesperson appointed by the Honorable Leader of the Opposition. He's not here speaking as leader of the National Federation Party per se. He can get that right, number one. Number two, Madam Speaker, discussion of the fundamentals, the rule of law, which is fundamental foundation to the economy, should be free in the discussion of taxpayers' money. Should not be restricted. That is my point of order, Madam Speaker.
Thank you for your point of order. The point of order is really on the rules and procedures of the House, not on content. However, I had made a ruling on the content that has been mentioned. That point of order is irrelevant. Dr. Biman Prasad, you may continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. They now want to stop people from expressing their opinion. Madam Speaker, unless we create an environment conducive for open debate, disagreements and transparency and accountability of every government action, government's lofty statements in believing our people will remain elusive. Trust and confidence is only created by being open and transparent. Let me begin by unpacking this confused government's and politicians' budget. GDP growth forecast. The Minister is proud of Fiji's economic growth of 5.3% for 2014. We have promised growth of 4.3% in 2015, declining but positive. Many, including the Honourable Minister of Finance, talked about this plus 5% growth as though it had never happened before. In fact, average growth in the 1970s before military coups was around 5%. Even in 2006, it was heading for 5% mark until we had the military coup. In truth, 5% growth is still a very ordinary performance. The question is, where did it come from? First, we had elections and a return to democracy, at least some kind of democracy. That has boosted economic confidence. We did not have democracy in the years 2007 to 2012. And in those years, our average economic growth averaged just 1% per annum. The Minister is very proud of his recent economic growth figures, but he is very quiet about Fiji's economic growth during its first years in power. If he understood economics, he would know the concept of pent-up demand. All we are now doing is catching up on where we should have been 9 years ago. The real question is not how well we are doing. The real question is how much better we would be doing now if there had been no military coups and 8 years of military government. Hundreds of millions of dollars in productivity, economic opportunity have been lost, which Fiji will never recover. Second, we've been borrowing and spending to keep up economic growth, and we all know that it is not sustainable. Third, we have remittances. Few people understand the importance to our economy of remittances from our people working and living overseas. Rugby players, security guards, nurses, caregivers. Remittances kept the Fiji economy going in the low years of 2007 and 2010. Today, much family expenditure for funerals, marriages, church and religious activities, school and university expenses are funded by our overseas relatives. Madam Speaker, this is a testament of how robust our kinship ties remain regardless of geographical distance. Last week, the Reserve Bank estimated that Fiji would receive about $430 million in remittances for 2015. This does not include the money that our citizens bring in with them in cash when they return to Fiji. Remittances are our second largest source of foreign exchange, ahead of sugar and behind only tourism. We receive remittances from the economic growth of other countries. We receive these remittances because our people can find better jobs overseas that they cannot find at home. This is a real credit to our people and their marketability. And even when I often lament how much Fiji loses in terms of brain drain, I am completely sympathetic to their choices. Our people work overseas because they cannot find opportunities to put their skills, experience and productivity to good use in their own country. The government cannot therefore take credit for this, but what the government should be recording is the wide dynamics of remittances from our people. This is not a soft research need, but if done well with proper trends, projections, can actively feed into future policies like a transparent national register of offshore Fijian experts that the nation can call on when the need arises. Fundamentally, Madam Speaker, it must be made clear that remittances fund only consumption expenditure. Remittances do not multiply growth and jobs in the same way as proper investment does. Production in the real goods sectors such as gold, fish and garments actually fell in 2014. Agriculture production as a whole fell by about 2.4% in 2014. So there is really no economic miracle. Pent-up demand, government spending, and the sacrifice of Fiji citizens offshore are why our economic growth figures are buoyant. What about the future? Even after all the borrowing and spending, is the government's growth sustainable? Apparently not. 2014 growth was 5.3%. In 2015, it is projected to be 4.3%. It falls further to 3.5% in 2016 and 3.1% in 2017 and 2018. This is at a time when economic growth in the rest of the world will be on the rise or expected to be on the rise. Why is Fiji's growth declining? There are a number of reasons. First, the government cannot keep borrowing and spending its way to economic growth. Like every household, you can borrow to have a party, and everyone feels good for a while, but pretty soon the party ends, and then it's time to pay the bills. We cannot have a government spending party on roads and airports every year. Yes, infrastructure is critical, but not at the expense of 3 square meals a day of the taxpayers. Because the very same taxpayers who pay the bill for the party, for whom much is demanded every budget session. Second, the government is running out of tricks to keep spending consumer high. For 2014, they reduced income tax. This pleased many people, particularly the richest people whose tax bills went down. But it also put money into taxpayers' pockets to spend, so it increased consumer spending, boosted economic growth. But the government cannot cut income taxes again. This is a one-time trick. So this year, the government has cut VAT and import duties on luxury items. This is the real reason why they have reduced VAT, so that people supposedly have more money to spend. Their spending will again boost the growth figures, but they cannot cut VAT again. This is also a one-time trick. And there are no more one-time tricks left. Third, disaster is looming for our sugar industry. In 2017, prices for our sugar will fall to less than half of what we are earning now. And we all know this. We have known this for many years, and in 2017, the collapse in the cane belt economy will begin. The income of farmers, cane cutters, rural shopkeepers, and the families will be slashed. There are no tricks to turn this around, and government has no plans ready for this. Madam Speaker, the government is hoping its spending and tax tricks will create a growth cycle that will encourage private sector investment. This is a gamble. If it fails, Fiji will be deeper in debt with bigger bills to pay. Private sector investment will not follow unless our politics is stable. Our economic fundamentals are right, and our economic policies are consistent. More on this later, Madam Speaker. Employment, wages and salaries, and poverty. Any growth in an economy, Madam Speaker, is good. There are always some benefits from it. But I think the most fundamental question is who is getting the benefit of this growth? Has it created jobs? Have wages and salaries of workers gone up? And what has growth done for the poorest people in our society? The widening disparity between the haves and have-nots, added to a thinning middle-class sector, will continue to weigh the economy down. This is basic economics, Madam Speaker, and that is why I continue to raise the issue about poverty. It is either we all grow together or we don't. We do not have the figures for 2013-2014 household income expenditure survey because the government is not releasing it, the Bureau is not releasing it. But we should not expect any difference in the poverty rate compared to the previous household income expenditure survey, 2008 and 2009 survey. And it is almost likely, Madam Speaker, that at least 30% of our people, that is 1 in 3 of Fiji's citizens, live in poverty and possibly more. I'm just wondering, it will be difficult for Kovis to put up a spin on that reality, Madam Speaker. Rural poverty has increased because of the declining agriculture sector and the sugar industry. This poverty will increase sharply in 2017 when sugar's day of reckoning arrives. Madam Speaker, the government's budget address took nearly 3 hours. And yet, only once did the Honourable Minister mention jobs. Only once, Madam Speaker. When he did mention jobs, it was no indication of real jobs. He told us that Investment Fiji had received investment proposals for 2,903 promised new jobs. The budget address is an endless list of promises. But what are the facts? Between 2010 and June 2015, 46,000 people registered at the National Employment Centre looking for jobs. How many permanent jobs could they find? Only 5,600. That is about 1,000 jobs every year. More than 12,000 of our young people will leave school this year, as they do every year. And what plans does the government have for them? Where will they find them? The government is so fixated on growth figures, they have forgotten that growth must mean something to our people. They have a slogan, but the people they save cannot eat slogans, Madam Speaker. Suba's latest retail center is the mother city in Rewanga. It's very impressive. There's upmarket grocery stores, bars, restaurants, movie theaters. You can buy the best clothes, electronic and sports goods there. This represents investment. And those who shop there create economic growth. But the only poor people you see at the Damodar city are the children selling roti parcels or pie or boo in the park. This investment, this economic growth, Madam Speaker, has done nothing for them. In fact, for them, the biggest impact of this budget on the poor is the additional bet that they will now pay on basic food items. Revenue measures in the 2016 budget, Madam Speaker. The key revenue measures in the budget is a strange and contradictory smorgasbord. From the viewpoint of fiscal management, they don't make much sense, Madam Speaker. Indeed, I can only think that the government is looking for another slogan. And that could be like this: I lowered VAT more than the NFP promised. This too would be a fine slogan, but in return one is expected to trade in one sense of rational logic. We welcome the reduction in VAT. And it is no secret, Madam Speaker, that the NFP and the opposition campaigned vigorously in the 2014 election to reduce VAT from 15 to 10%. But here is the funny thing. Every argument that we put forward, Madam Speaker, in favor of VAT reduction was rubbished by every Fiji First candidate in the election. For example, in August 2014, Honorable Mahendra Reddy said, and I quote, the reduction of VAT is not helping the poor because it is helping the rich and business people. These are the people who are paying most of VAT, unquote. Honorable Dr. Mahendra Reddy. The Honorable Finance Minister was also at the forefront to condemn any reduction. In September last year, he told his favorite newspaper, the Fiji Sun, the following, and I quote, by reducing VAT from 15 to 10%, the tourists and big businesses will be benefiting, unquote, Madam Speaker. Clearly, Madam Speaker, the government has had a change of heart. Of course, we are happy, Madam Speaker, very happy, that the government is actually trying to learn something from the opposition. This is not a bad thing in democracy. It's not a bad thing in democracy, Madam Speaker. And VAT which applies to everybody is not something we choose merely for political upmanship. But it seems that the government and the Honourable Minister of Finance have not been very good students of the argument we put forward in the last election. And some of them obviously slept through some of those lectures because they've forgotten a very critical element in the policy mix, which is that when you remove zero rating from essential VAT items, especially food items, which the poor were buying, you must make sure that you give extra financial support to that group. There is good, simple economic logic for removing zero rating from essential food item and prescription, and I understand that. It does simplify the VAT collection process for FECA, and it means that those of us who can afford to pay VAT on essential items, like the Honourable Minister of Finance and me, will pay and government will get more revenue. But it leaves out the poor people for whom the zero rating was originally intended. What will happen to them? Madam Speaker, let me quote a writer in the FIJI Times last week. This is what he said, and I quote, "Everyone is happy that VAT has been reduced from 15% to 9%, but forgot one very minor thing, that 9% VAT will now be charged on basic food items and medicine, which was not previously charged. I believe that many of Fiji's population live under poverty line. As it is, they find it hard to survive. Now with VAT charge on basic food items is back to 1 meal per day. Even a cent can make a lot of difference. Thanks, government. Like you say, Fiji first," unquote. This is not a minister talking. This is not members of parliament talking. It is a member of Fiji public talking, Madam Speaker. And he seems to have more common sense. More on this, Madam Speaker. Let me give you an example. A person with a wage rate of $4 per hour working for 50 hours per week will earn about $200 per week, $800 per month, $9,600 per year, minus $768 FNPF contribution. The net per week is $170. And if that person is a single earner in a household of 3 or 4, then it is estimated that that household will spend about 60 to 70% of that income on basic food items, whereas those earning over 20,000 and more, the average spending on basic food items, or indeed all food items, might be between 8 to 10%. Madam Speaker, the dollar is squeezed, stretched, and pulled further when there is less of it in the first place. For Fiji's population, the majority are in that income bracket. Once again, this reality, Madam Speaker, might be a difficult spin for Kovis, even if the grand handing out ceremonies look nice and colorful. Madam Speaker, an estimated 72% of the population earn below the income tax threshold, and therefore the majority of them would be hit hard by the imposition of the 9% VAT on basic food items. It is simple. If you're going to hit the poorest in this way, it is the obligation of any responsible government to cushion the blow. But social welfare payments are not increasing. And what will happen to those people who do not receive social welfare payments, pensioners and those on fixed incomes? Madam Speaker, we are talking about 60,000 households that are on or below the poverty line. The government says that the price of rice, cooking oil, fish, flour, tea, milk, and prescription drugs will go up by 9%, but the price of meat, furniture, and hardware will come down. I might have breaking news for the government. The majority of the poor can't afford meat all the time, they can't afford furniture, and they probably can't afford hardware. But this is why this VAT reduction and the increase in 9% on basic food items is really a slap in the face of the poor people. The rich can afford meat. They can afford furniture. And the rich can afford hardware. They can also afford luxury cars and flat-screen TVs. All these things will now be cheaper for wealthy people, and the government will collect less VAT from them. That is the government's gift to the richest people in Fiji, while it takes away money from the poorest people by imposing that 9% VAT on basic food items. Why is the government doing this? Is it because the poor people don't matter? They've got the votes already? They might face them in 2018 again. It is rich spending that matters, because this will make the government's economic figures go up. The more you spend, they tell us, the more you save. In fact, that might be a silly statement, which really makes the government's propaganda sound like a sales pitch from Roof's Big Bear. But it is the government's slogans and the economic growth figures that matter most to them, not jobs and not the poor. This is why the budget speech mentioned jobs only once. But let me also say, Madam Speaker, that the government is also playing with fire. VAT is already an increasing proportion of government revenue. And if the government has got its maths wrong, and they usually do, then we will end up in deeper debt. The government says that the VAT reduction will result in a loss of $316 million in revenue. But that they will be able to recover more than this. First, they say they will gain $108.6 million because they are now charging VAT on basic food items. Then they say that they will take $127 million from STT, sales and turnover tax, and the environmental levy. Then they will get $120 million from so-called VAT compliance initiatives. Like every politician, Madam Speaker, the Honourable Minister is saying, I'm sure I can collect $120 million by making VAT collection more efficient. But that remains hope. It's not a policy. It is not based on any concrete evidence or reality. You cannot just pretend that $120 million will turn up if you look under the bed. And if the government has got this wrong, and other amounts from other new revenue measures, then this budget deficit will possibly be much higher than what's been projected in the 2006 budget. As it happened in 2014, the actual deficit was more than 4%, Madam Speaker. Let me come back to tourism, the sales turnover tax and the environmental levy. Madam Speaker, the government thinks that whatever tax money they give back to Fiji citizens, we can arm twist our tourists. Again, government is playing with fire, because they may be threatening the stability of the tourism industry, one of Fiji's biggest employers and biggest earners of foreign exchange. In fact, there are many silly things in the budget. But one of the silliest was the statement about tourists, that they will willingly pay a small additional charge to support environmental protection program. That may be correct for some of them, Madam Speaker. But first, tourists are not paying to support environmental protection programs. They are paying to make up for the gap in VAT. This so-called environmental levy is not going to the environment or the most direct custodians of our environment. It is going straight into the gaping hole in the government's budget. Second, it is not a small additional charge. Together with the STT, tourists who come to Fiji must now pay 11% more for their holidays. How can Fiji stay competitive when our own government is adding this cost to our biggest industry? How can tourists enjoy the chill-out time in Fiji when they know they are being strong armed into coughing up for the government's fiscal inadequacies that has nothing to do with the holiday expenses? Let me quote from a speech made 1 year ago. There are many tourist destinations in the world competing for the interest, attention, and dollars of the affluent traveling public. Fiji needs to stay on top. The Honourable Minister may recognize those words, Madam Speaker. They came from his budget speech last year. The government's economic policy on tourism investment is perhaps the most confusing of all. In last year's budget, tax incentives for tourism were increased. The definition of project was widened under the 11th schedule of the Income Tax Act. The short life investment package SLIP was extended to include the building of short stay apartments. Now this year, the Minister says he will phase out these allowances altogether. Beginning this year. Why is he doing this? Why is he doing this? The Minister says this is because Fiji has a mature world-class hospitality sector and it no longer needs these tax incentives. Government must be living on another planet. Let me, Madam Speaker, let me give them a short lecture in economics. Our tourism industry has a long way to go. Our tourism industry has a long way to go before it is considered mature. In the last 5 years, our tourist numbers have increased from 630,000 to 690,000, an increase of about 2% a year. Smaller and more isolated island countries like Mauritius and even the Maldives are rapidly increasing their tourist numbers. They have hit the million tourist mark. Why? Because these nations have investor-friendly policies, including strong tax incentives, and they apply them consistently and predictably. Why do they do this? Is it because they want to give foreign investors tax-free income? No. It's because they recognize that tourism creates real and permanent jobs. Jobs, you'll recall, is what the budget address and the Honourable Minister said nothing about. The hospitality industry is labour intensive. It requires skilled and experienced people. The industry is competitive. It trains its people and pays them better than other sectors. In fact, Madam Speaker, they could be paid even better. And there was no mention of that. Competition for good employees is also high. That, Madam Speaker, is why the tourism industry, at this point in time, before we hit the million mark, needs to be supported. Finally, tourism investors are hit harder than the other businesses. This is because the so-called 6% environmental levy is not the same as VAT. When a business returns for VAT on its gross income, it can claim VAT input credits on its expenses, Madam Speaker. The environmental levy does not allow for input credits. So the additional costs for the tourism investors are even higher than they look. I can only imagine that being a tourism investor in Fiji is like riding a very bad roller coaster. Tax breaks come and go. Tax definitions change from year to year. Duty is imposed on the goods they need, then it is taken off. Taxes for their guests rise every year. Whether it is departure tax at the airport or service turnover tax on meals. And tourism, Madam Speaker, is one of the few industries where Fiji has a comparative advantage. Not only do we have an ideal natural environment for tourism, our people are truly first-class hosts. It's a pity that the industry can only be supported by a third-class government. Debt and borrowing. Madam Speaker, now we come to another worrying problem. Government debt between 2006 and 2014 rose by about 1.136 billion, nearly 40%. This does not include government guarantees for statutory bodies and government companies. These are contingent liabilities. They are not budgeted and accounted for. If any of these guarantees are called on, government debt would again go up. These liabilities are 2.4 billion in June 2014, or were 2.4 billion in June 2014. That is another 30% of GDP. These contingent liabilities are real exposures. Government debt is now hovering around 50% of GDP. This is about 10% higher than what it should be in a well-ordered economy, 40 to 45%. In many countries, it is of course worse than this. but we should not be measuring our economic performance against those countries. Total debt increased from 3.7 billion to an estimated 4.4 billion. This means that every year we could be paying more than 30% of our total revenue for debt repayment. For every $3 we raise in revenue, we pay $1 to our creditors in interest and debt payments. That is money denied to the people for health, education, and other services. So when we borrow money, we must know we are borrowing for good purpose and not just for another of the government's slogans. When are we going to pay this debt back, Madam Speaker? A very crucial question. When are we going to stop the spending party? Madam Speaker, this government is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on roads. Roads seem to be their particular obsession. Roads are no doubt a good thing, but so too is education, health, and social welfare. My main concern about the obsessive spending on roads is that no one knows how well the money is being used in. That's the most critical question. In the 2015 budget, a total of 653 million was allocated. Actual expenditure to date, Madam Speaker, after the first 3 quarters, was about 237 million out of 653 million. Does it mean that the balance of 416 million will be used in the 4th quarter from October to December? In fact, the Minister for Infrastructure should provide a detailed breakdown of how the balance will be spent and what sort of oversight they have to ensure that we are getting value for money. It is almost certain that a lot of funds are being wasted towards the end because of the haste to spend. We've all been down pitted pothole roads, the same roads that just a few years ago the government pointed to with pride after a Malaysian or Chinese contractor merely applied a coat of tar to it. How much did this cost? And what value did we get for what we paid? The Auditor General's report for 2014 has just been published. As reported in the media, it only gives a qualified opinion of the accounts of the FIJI Roads Authority. Why? Because the FIJI Road Authority's own information about its road system is so poor that its accounts cannot be made accurate. If you can't measure, you can't manage. But has the FIJI Roads Authority audited the quality of the roads that have been done over the last 10 years to see how well all the government's road expenditure has been spent? If not, it should, so we can learn from the lessons from the past. Or is it perhaps like the poverty statistics that the information does not match what the government wants? In 2014, the government said it would raise 415 million in revenue by selling government assets. But few, if any, of these assets have been sold, as I cautioned in my budget response last year. Because no one wanted to buy our assets, Madam Speaker. In 2015, the Honourable Finance Minister promised to raise 507 million in asset sales. Again, that promise was not turned into a deed. They've only so far raised 100 million, and even that is raised by mostly raiding the government's favourite piggy bank, the Fiji National Provident Fund, an organisation the government controls, but that workers in this country own, Madam Speaker. The government continues to ignore with impunity the input of the workers who own the FNPF. Since the military coups of 2006, FNPF pensioners and workers have continued to suffer. Pension rates are unilaterally reduced and many pensioners are still suffering today. A legal contract between them and FNPF was illegally terminated. Worse still, the pensioners were denied justice through a decree where they could not challenge the decision, and all this happened under the current Attorney General and the Minister of Finance. Let me give a real example as to show how some of the pensioners were affected. Mr. X went on pension with a legal contract. This was terminated and his pension reduced. He decided to go for a 5-year term pension. This term will end in 2017. He's a healthy man living with his wife and children. In 2017, his term pension will end and he will have nothing thereafter to survive. He will not be eligible, Madam Speaker, for the $50 pension under the current rule. The lives of some of these pensioners have been shattered and no one has worried about them. I can almost predict that before 2018, I will be bringing those grim tales to this House again. We should take more than a passing interest because many of us in this House, or will be, or are ourselves pensioners. Government together with FNPF should urgently review some of those decisions and find ways in which pensioners who lost out ought to be compensated. A legal contract, Madam Speaker, was violated. Why is government not appointing workers and employees left to the FNPF board? Why? What's the problem? They are the owners of the fund. About 80% of Fiji National Provident Fund members retiring over the next 4 years, Madam Speaker, will have balances less than $50,000. In fact, the 2015 annual report shows that only 5% opted for pension. And the recent announcement for increased rate for term annuities is a joke, and actually, I find it simply criminal. Why would any retiree want to opt for any of those options? In fact, when the current pension rate, with the current pension, most retirees would opt for lump sum payment. They'll just take out the money because there's no point going on pension. A large majority, Madam Speaker, would not be able to make any significant investment if their balance is less than $50,000. In fact, many of them over the years will fall into a situation of low-income households. And in the end, the government will be burdened, and the responsibility for looking after these people would fall on the government, on the Social Welfare Department. We might have to change the rules again. Madam Speaker, I suggest that government appoint a joint parliamentary committee to look at the operations of FNPF and have a thorough discussion with all stakeholders, especially members, to see how best we can restructure FNPF and re-look at the retirement options. Use of FNPF fund by members for housing and social development. FNPF should not be used to support this government's overzealous operating expenditure. If anything, FNPF should be investing in housing development projects, help increase home ownership of its members. And I also, Madam Speaker, call upon the government to immediately change the board of FNPF so that representatives of workers are appointed on the board. I mean, we cannot, as a parliament, as a government, we cannot ignore the wishes of the workers and the owners of FNPF. Singapore used its central provident fund only for social and retirement benefits, and that is why home ownership is more than 80% in Singapore. They used that to build homes for their members. FNPF should do the same. It should not become a piggy bank for the government. Madam Speaker, just 2 days ago, the Chief Financial Officer of FNPF is quoted in the local daily as saying that the FNPF will review the death benefit of $8,500 because it had become unsustainable. This is really adding salt to injury of the FNPF members. FNPF now intends to reduce this to a partial payment of $2,000 with the balance of $6,500 put into the deceased member accounts for the benefit of the nominee. Madam Speaker, the administrator or nominee of a deceased need money for funeral expenses. I'm sure all of us are in agreement that these days funeral and other expenses for performance of final rites cost much more than the $2,000. And the FNPF cannot claim that it does not have funds to make the payout. For example, if 400,000 members are registered and pay an annual sum of $35, the fund would accumulate roughly about $14 million, Madam Speaker. And if, for example, 1,000 members die each year, the fund would pay out only $8.5 million. Therefore, I can't see the reason why they're finding the current payout as unsustainable. And death benefit, Madam Speaker, is not a handout by FNP or by government. It is really not government's money, it's the FNP of members' money. Fund requires members to comply with nomination criteria as well as the annual payment of $35. The government's promise for 2015 for a budget deficit of 161 million is what is provided in the estimate. In fact, it will be at least 350 million, it seems to me, Madam Speaker, from our calculation. One more promise in the last budget, not 10 into these. And the interest that we might pay to borrow to cover up for the deficit will eventually be borne by the people of this country. Similarly, the government has once again budgeted for asset sales, revenues of 320 million in 2016. But if this is not achieved, we will again end with a higher deficit and we'll have to borrow more for 2016. Let me make some remarks on overseas borrowing, Madam Speaker, which is another notable but concerning trend in Fiji. We borrow in US dollars most of the time, meaning we have to pay the debt back in US dollars. In the next 5 years, it's almost certain that our currency will fall against the US dollar. So we'll have to find even more Fiji dollars to repay the same debt. Let me make the reference to the global bond. In 2006, the SDL government, under the SDL government, the global bond of 150 million US was raised at a 6.8% interest rate. The military government used it all. When it was time to pay back in 2011, they went and borrowed another US 250 million, 100 million more, 543 million. They never told us why they borrowed that extra 100 million. But on the new borrowing, Madam Speaker, they paid 9% instead of 6.8%. Everybody at that time knew, everybody in this country in the financial sector knew that we could have borrowed that money at a lower interest. But of course, there were conditions, and the government did not want to accept those conditions. So to refinance that, they had to borrow another 250 million. And that 250 million was due in March 2016. The government decided that we have to borrow again because we don't have the money to pay. So we went slightly before March, borrowed through the global bond another 200 million. And we paid 50 million out of our sinking fund of 81 million to clear the 50 million and still have $200 million to pay. So the sinking fund is now left with only 31 million. We should have been building that, Madam Speaker, but it's down to only $31 million, and I don't see any way how government will raise the level of sinking fund. What we are not being told, Madam Speaker, is that 250 million US dollars that we borrowed in 2011, how much interest have we paid? The 9 million interest that the Honourable Minister portrays as if it's a saving. You didn't any. It can't be a saving. It's just that you've negotiated a bond and you tried to pay that 50 million a bit earlier and borrowed another 200 million.
Order.
What nonsense, in terms of saving.
Order. You've continued to personalize your presentation. You might force me to take drastic
Madam
measures.
Speaker, it's not personalizing. It's the Minister for Finance making a budget speech.
Order. Do not make reference to any member of Parliament, being a minister. Make reference to the speech that was made. Please do not ignore my ruling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is yet another example of how constrained we are in this Parliament.
Order. Do not make comments on my ruling. Please continue with your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, borrowing always entails interest. And when we pay interest, we actually have to raise that interest, raise that income from somewhere. And eventually, when government borrows, every Fiji citizen pays by sacrificing the services we cannot afford. And our interest bill is growing. If you look at the debt level, both external and domestic debt, total debt, we have to pay more interest. Interest must be paid from higher taxes or reduced spending. So, in the end, it will be Fiji's people who will be shackled by the burden of this debt, the largest that Fiji has ever had. The most shocking thing, Madam Speaker, about the sale of government asset, the FIJI Airports Fiji, Fiji Ports Company Limited, is that the money we will collect will not be used to reduce debt. It will be used to fund ordinary government annual spending. It's like selling your house. It's like selling your house to pay for your groceries. When you are left with no assets, what will you do then? You know, it's like selling one's soul for 30 pieces of silver. How can we keep growth going? Madam Speaker, it is clear that economic growth is necessary for extra jobs. Continued consumption-driven demand can help for a while, but not in the long run. We need to ensure that productive sectors such as agriculture, mining, fisheries, forestry and manufacturing pick up. There are some good work done by some good ministers on the other side, Madam Speaker, to raise these sectors. But why have these sectors not picked up? They need to ask this question. Another of government's silly moments come when they talk about implementing reforms to improve the business climate. This is what the IMF has said to them. And they say that it's music to their ears. If that is true, Madam Speaker, I doubt what they're hearing and reading from the IMF. For 9 years, we've been told that Fiji is improving the climate for investment. New laws are passed, new changes are promised, and every so-called reform has failed. And I'll tell you why. And what is the evidence? Madam Speaker, the World Bank uses a measuring tool. It's called the Ease of Doing Business Index, which ranks every country in the world for ease of doing business and investment. For 9 years, Fiji's ranking has gone down this index. For 9 years. It started in 2007 at number 56. Now it is at number 82. For ease of starting a business, another sub-ranking, Madam Speaker, Fiji's ranking are shocking 160 out of 189 countries in the world. What are we talking about? What have these reforms done? Let's have a serious and honest look at those reforms. Small and medium enterprises suffer from unbelievable bureaucratic obstacles. Let me give you just one example. How hard it should be to get a business license from the Super City Council? The Business Licensing Act is simple. It says fill out a form, pay the license fee, get your license. But this is not what the council says. This is what you need to produce to get your business license, Madam Speaker. If you think I'm joking, I'm actually not. I'm reading from the Super City Council Business License Application Form.
I'm not thinking.
1, a thoroughly filled application form, a copy of business registration certificate, 1 copy of FTIB certificate if a foreign investor, 1 copy of TIN registration letter from FECA, 1 copy of health license if operating a restaurant, takeaway, bar, butcher, nightclub, hair salon or food business, directors' names and contacts including 1 copy of the photo ID, 1 copy of consent letter from landlord if renting premises, 1 copy of liquor license if applicable, 1 copy of OHS letter from Ministry of Labour, 1 copy of National Fire Authority certificate, 1 copy of building completion certificate, 1 copy to store controlled substance, 1 copy of copyright license from Fiji Intellectual Property Office for sale of higher. This is just to get a business license. This is why the World Bank is saying ease of starting business index, we are 160. They should get that. They don't understand that, Madam Speaker. Remember, you need this license in order to operate every year. Every year. This is almost comical. Any small to medium business person will be spending more time filling out these forms than actually starting the business. What was the government's clever idea to rectify this? They said instead of 1 year, create a 3-year business license. So now you have to run around chasing paper once every 3 years. But why are we running around at all? The information that is required by the council, in my view, is useless. They don't need it. They never use it. So why you do? I mean, these are things that they need to look at, Madam Speaker. This is the same bureaucracy that every business complains about in every regulatory agency, whether it's Investment Fiji, whether it's FIJI, city councils, town councils, immigration department. I mean, we need to have a serious look at this, Madam Speaker. And it's a symptom. It's a symptom of control and command bureaucracy. You know, there seems to be a paranoia about controlling everything. And this is filtered down to every government, department, statutory organization. I mean, controls are good, but let's not be in a situation where we actually kill all the initiatives. Government wants to do several other things, as I said, Madam Speaker, to control how businesses operate, how businesses conduct their activities. You know, Madam Speaker, you keep hearing government giving lectures to business people. And it's coming from some people who've never run a business. And I don't give lectures to businesses. I listen to them. Civil service reforms, Madam Speaker. The government promised these reforms last year. These promises again were those not turned into deeds. And the government now hilariously blames the World Bank. Apparently it's the World Bank fault in a fashion which is symptomatic of this government's blame game. Blame it on everyone else under the sun except themselves. Madam Speaker, it's a little bit surprising because I thought that when the military government took over in 2007, they had solved all the problems of corruption and efficiency, and it appears that they are still busy doing it. In fact, we haven't, and I remember Honorable Randondo asking this question in Parliament last time about a plan for the reform in the civil service. And we were told that there is an oral plan. Madam Speaker, the entire public service is run today in a culture of fear, paranoia and suspicion. Any civil servant who disagrees with the Prime Minister or anyone, as I have seen, is dealt with in one of the following two ways. Either they are deemed to be a serving corrupt interest, so FIJI is called in. Otherwise, the civil servant is deemed to be a supporter of an opposition political party, in which case he or she is terminated. Some of the finest public servants, Madam Speaker, I know have been reduced to mute paper shufflers. Those who try to be helpful to the public will lower their voices and check that no one is listening. I've had the experience, Madam Speaker. Civil servants are not even allowed to talk to the leader of the opposition when she visits them at their post. One has only to look at the recent experience, again, Madam Speaker, of the police and the military. The 2013 Constitution, Madam Speaker, gives powers to the Public Service Minister to have the final say on all appointments and promotions. What is happening and will happen is that the ministers, it will happen, Madam Speaker, they will turn the civil service into a political party's apparatus. This destruction of one of the key institutions of government is the worst and most dangerous legacy that this government under the imposed 2013 Constitution will leave for the people of Fiji, Madam Speaker. Only those with the arrogance, ignorance, and may I say godlike complex will not see it. I therefore propose, Madam Speaker, that government does not set up this ministry. It does not set up this ministry of public service, but continue to strengthen Public Service Commission and make it responsible for the civil service. Very important, Madam Speaker, to not just destroy institutions just because it's become the fashion. Let's look at what is working and what is not working. The politicization of the civil service under what is in the Constitution, Madam Speaker, today they might be feeling very good, some of the ministers, that they have the power. They have the final say. They can promote anybody they like. But, Madam Speaker, they should think long term. Government should think long term. Tomorrow, there is another government. There is another party in power. They will do the same. They will do the same, Madam Speaker, and will destroy. I mean, the civil service, Madam Speaker, was built in this country. Even in the dark days of '87, the civil service, to a large extent, remained neutral, remained an independent organization. Despite the pressure by those in power at that time to destroy it, the Public Service Commission remained. The process remained, Madam Speaker, of appeal and promotion. Let's not destroy that. Let's not destroy that. Just because, what will the Ministry of Public Service do? I mean, the power in the Constitution is with the minister concerned.
Listen to the speech.
What would they do? So, Madam Speaker, I make the call that it's useless to set up another ministry. Keep the Public Service Commission, strengthen the Public Service Commission to ensure that the public service remains an independent institution in this country. Let me come to sugar industry, Madam Speaker. For more than 100 years, Madam Speaker, as I have said before, the sugar industry has been the backbone of our economy. This stopped after the turn of the century when tourism and later Fiji water overtook sugar as the latest foreign exchange earner. For more than 100 years, including the indenture period, the sugar industry has weathered many storms and defined the national landscape. It has survived cyclones, floods, droughts, 2 world wars, industrial and political strikes, and political upheavals. But finally, an industry which has directly or indirectly supported a quarter of Fiji's population across races throughout history is now bleeding to death, Madam Speaker. Industry stakeholders have run out of answers on how to revive it. The industry's best hope for recovery 10 years ago was derailed by the December 2006 coup. That's a fact. We need to put that record on every occasion. The military government deliberately sacrificed the injection of $350 million grant to the industry by the European Union. Had this materialized, Madam Speaker, from 2011 onwards, would have been producing a minimum of 4 million tons of cane and 400,000 tons of sugar using more efficient methods than we are using now. Madam Speaker, sugar is a lifeblood industry. It is far too important for it to be allowed to die. But this government, and now as the Fiji First administration, instead of providing both theoretical and practical solutions, it is adopting a firefighting approach, which in reality is like most fires in the country this year, is destroying the properties. As I've said right from the beginning of this address, this seems to be the modus operandi of this government. They make it up as they go along. It is shocking to me that the sugar industry is facing the greatest threat to its survival in less than 2 years, and the government really has no vision or no plan. If it does have one, Madam Speaker, then certainly I have not seen it. 200,000 people who depend directly on it haven't seen it. These people, the cane farmers, their families, the cane cutters, the lorry operators, the lorry drivers, laborers, farm hands, are demoralized. They are in need of encouragement. High cost of production are the biggest disincentive and danger. For the last 9 years or so, they have continued to faithfully perform their duties to the industry and the nation despite the tumultuous times that the country has undergone, and despite having the full knowledge that the price of sugar would go down massively after 30th September 2017. But Madam Speaker, when they are in desperate need of financial and technical assistance, the government is seemingly clueless on how to provide constructive solutions instead of the current band-aid solutions. Madam Speaker, last season we produced 1.83 million tons of cane. We are still a long way from achieving a production of more than 3 million tons of cane and 300,000 tons of sugar, the minimum required for the long-term viability of the industry. If the TCTS ratio of 8 tons to 1 ton to sugar is maintained from last season, then 3 million tons of sugar cane will produce about 375 tons of sugar. This will be the ideal minimum benchmark. But not only are we 1 million tons away from this minimum target, we have no margin for error. This year drought will severely impact cane production, so again, we will fall very short. We put a lot of effort in bringing foreign investors into Fiji, but what have we done to encourage our own people to re-enter the sugar industry? Madam Speaker, farming is hard and physically demanding. Farmers are subject to the whims of weather and the prices on the world market. Life is insecure. This is why they encourage the children to do something else. No one is joining the cane farming community. Why would they do so? Until we have a strategy for mechanization, for improving farm productivity, providing technical and administrative support for farmers, this situation will not change. This is too serious a problem to ignore, Madam Speaker. I have asked the government before to set up a task force involving all political parties in Parliament to work on this problem. So far I have been ignored. But if government does not have a solution, why will it not accept help? Why would it not accept a collective effort to resolve this, Madam Speaker? The Prime Minister, while addressing the 46th session of the ISO Council in London on November 29th last year, said, and I quote, "The abolition of EU sugar production quotas post 30th September 2017 and the consequent adverse implications on sugar prices pose a very big challenge indeed. Moreover, EU sugar prices have already come under pressure, with significant falls compared to prevailing prices over a year. So suppliers like Fiji are having to prepare for a reduction in our export revenues even before 2017. A sobering prospect for any developing nation," unquote. A sobering prospect indeed, Madam Speaker. What is the government doing about it? In the 2015 budget, about $36 million was listed under Head 35 as aid in kind from the European Union for social mitigation. There has been no explanation in the budget estimates or in the supplement as to what this means. Until now, nobody from government, including the Prime Minister, has clarified this despite being raised in Parliament. Now this year, Madam Speaker, we are told that 5 million has been allocated for the cane planting assistance program. We are also told that it would cost $400 to plough an acre of land ready for planting cane. This also includes fallow land. Madam Speaker, anyone well versed with cane farming will tell you that currently it costs about $120 to get an acre of land ploughed by a tractor. For fallow land, it is vital that the block is ploughed 3 times and harrowed thrice as well. This alone will cost a grower $720. So the fact that it is so costly to prepare fallow land for cane planting is proof enough of failure of government's cane planting program. Government also said that the sugar budget for 2016 has increased by more than 12 million. The real increase is not 12 million, Madam Speaker, it's just 600,000. And this amount, Madam Speaker, has been allocated as grant to the Sugarcane Growers Council in place of the levy paid by growers. This after government decided to end all semblance of democracy in the Growers Council by legislating appointment of a 9-member council instead of restoring elections and democratizing the council. Madam Speaker, the government seems to think that it can solve the problems of the sugar industry by itself. It cannot. less than 2 years from 2017. It has no plan. It must, Madam Speaker, it must work with the stakeholders to find a way. It may already be too late to save the industry from disaster, but at least we can try. A sum of 9.7 million is listed as subsidy to South Pacific Fertilizers Limited. However, this will be administered by the FSC. Last year, this amount was listed under Head 50 and not the sugar industry. Again, Madam Speaker, is this a subsidy or a loan? In last year's budget, this was listed as a loan. Therefore, growers end up repaying the amount as 100% of SPFL is owned by growers. So who is government trying to fool, Madam Speaker? Furthermore, why should the FSC control this subsidy or loan and not the growers themselves? FSC has no stake whatsoever in SPFL. Yet, its executive chairman also heads the fertilizer company. This is the height of injustice, Madam Speaker. A sum of over $33 million is listed as aid in kind. Last year, an amount of $36 million, let me repeat that again, Madam Speaker, was similarly listed as aid. But what is this money? We want to know. I repeat, there's been no clarification as to what the $36 million was going to be used for. We need answers on that, Madam Speaker. Now, this year, we have the budget document stating a sum of $33 million again. And again, we need very clear explanation of what this 33 million is all about. Health and education reforms. Madam Speaker, I want to make a few comments about health and education, and I'm sure my honorable colleagues from this side will have more to say. We all understand the importance of human capital. For our people, there is no point having a government if it cannot provide these basic services. From an economic point of view, there is no point spending hundreds of millions of dollars on roads if there are no healthy and productive people to use them. Madam Speaker, we spend hundreds of millions of dollars on reforming our roads, but when will we do this for our education system in a proper way? Recently, the Education Minister made some shocking admissions about the quality of our education system. And Madam Speaker, I pause here to actually thank him for that. Unlike many of his colleagues on the other side who wish to pretend that there is no bad news, he at least is prepared to identify a problem. Madam Speaker, the problem he identified was this: only 15% of our secondary school students achieve a raw pass rates in maths and 20% in the sciences. This now moves from shocking to deplorable. Here we have the government fantasizing about Fiji becoming a Singapore or a New Mauritius, or the latest dream, a Geneva, when people were leaving school without basic literacy skills. The deplorable state of our education system and the cost to Fiji will rear its ugly head in the next 5 to 10 years down the line if it is not arrested and addressed urgently and decisively. Not only will our productivity be seriously affected, so will social equality. Education, Madam Speaker, and I agree with the government, the education is the surest way out of poverty for our poorest people. But now, a mediocre education system threatens to trap them there. The rich will always find alternatives, Madam Speaker, private schools, other ways, but the education gap between the rich and poor will become wider. That will heighten economic inequality and social instability. Madam Speaker, unless we can quickly get education back on track, we will never achieve our dreams of real sustainable economic growth. And government's neglect of this, like the sugar industry, is a ticking time bomb. Madam Speaker, I commended the Minister for Education for his honesty. I'm once again overwhelmed. I'm once again actually underwhelmed by his solutions. He appears to be suffering from the same disease that many on the other side are, too afraid to listen to critical comments, unwilling to engage with anyone whose views differ from his. I'm asking, Madam Speaker, government, for the sake of school students in this country, to show that they can engage in dialogue. I'm pleading and asking them to ask for views, especially those that they don't like. and urgently set up a process from which he can take the best ideas of reform. Madam Speaker, the Honourable Minister for Education in his maiden speech announced formation of an Education Commission. In fact, like that, they should have copied the NFP manifesto and set up an Education Commission, because the last one we had was in 2014. And in the last 14 years, Madam Speaker, a lot of things have happened. A lot of things have happened, a lot of reforms that the military government put in place, the former Minister for Education put in place. We are turning it around. But do we have a detailed, critically analyzed report which says how we have fared in the last 14 years, what we should do? Let's not bring in policies as we go along. Madam Speaker, that's all I'm saying that we need to do. We need to pause now, set up that commission, spend 6 months. 6 months. Because it's important for us to get it right. If we don't get it right, the price we're going to pay in the future is going to be very, very bad one for us, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me now turn to health. The health budget, we are told, has been increased by 280 million, an increase of 11.2 million. But whether in the macro scheme of things, Madam Speaker, that is enough, in 2009 the World Health Organization recommended that governments increase the health budgets progressively by 0.5% of GDP annually. This was with the aim of increasing it to 5% of GDP. Unfortunately, the 2016 allocation represents a decrease in health spending as a percentage of GDP from 3% of GDP to 2.9% of GDP. So we are going backwards. However, Madam Speaker, in 2015 budget, government promised to recruit 150 additional doctors, and again promises to recruit the same number in 2016. However, only 126 new doctor graduates have been recruited so far, and we are told no expected doctors have been recruited. The Minister in his reply can correct me on that. We still have a shortfall of 24 for this year, yet we have allocated budget for another 150 for 2016. And perhaps the Honourable Minister ought to come out clearly and explain, Madam Speaker, the situation with the number of doctors that we have now. How many have left the service, for example? How many will graduate from medical schools this year? Whether we will be able to hire the additional 150 plus the 24 that we still haven't hired in 2015, in 2016. Despite the increased allocation of the budget for the ministry, Madam Speaker, health services have remained a major concern for the people of Fiji. From poor services, long waiting lists and time, lack of drugs, non-functioning medical equipment, unavailability of doctors and nurses, and timely diagnosis for patients with serious illness. The introduction of a health levy is positive, but has the revenue collected from this year marked for specific health initiatives? We need to know this, or we will assume that it is just another revenue measure by government. At this, Madam Speaker, I would also like to raise the issue of annual tobacco registration, where government was collecting about 700,000 annually, of which 400,000 was directed to NCD activities. This, I am told, was withdrawn in 2015 and has not been reinstated in the 2016 budget. Let us also not pay lip service to the reduction of NCD-related diseases and do something serious. And I would have thought that all that money from tobacco registration should go to NCD-related activities and campaigns to educate our people. Madam Speaker, we should also, I think, review the support through TELS and scholarship for medical courses. Typically, a doctor needs 5 years to complete the study. Maybe he spends another 2 years in rural service, then possibly undertakes another 4 years of specialty training, and maybe another 2 years for further specialty training abroad. And some good doctors that we have done that before being eligible as a fully trained specialist status. This is a long and expensive investment for an individual. Therefore, Madam Speaker, we need to review not only the conditions for training support, but also urgently review the salaries of not only doctors, but also the nurses and other allied health workers. On free medicine, I see that list has been increased to 142 items. However, we are told that this year only 20 items on the list were intermittently available. Is this announcement another gimmick to fool the people? When 20 out of only 70 were available. I think the Ministry of Health should really front up and tell this House whether the scheme is working or not. Capital works, Madam Speaker, is another issue. We are told that many of the capital projects such as maternity ward in CWM, New Naulu Health Centre and Osori Hospital, Mokoi Maternity Unit in 2015 are still languishing. And one last question, Madam. What happened to the allocation for the new tertiary hospital in Lotoka? Have we moved anywhere on that? Last issue, Madam Speaker, before I conclude. The Sustainable Development Goal and climate change. Madam Speaker, the budget documents show that government is at least considering sound advice from the opposition. Honorable Nawai Kula had made a public statement about the turf wars between the various government entities on climate change, and thankfully, it now appears that the Ministry of Finance Strategic Planning Office will holistically coordinate as the new national focal point on all technical policy development and administrative functions related to climate change. On the new role of the Strategic Planning Office, the Minister of Finance states in his budget address that this office will hire 13 new staff to assist with the climate change section. Madam Speaker, climate change is a very specialized field that is greatly dependent on institutional knowledge of the very fluid global development, especially in the technical and policy areas. A good portion of this expertise also resides with both the Environment Department and very recently the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Yet sadly, we have not been able to retain some of that expertise as many of our homegrown experts have moved on. However, since Fiji has just recently appointed a climate change and oceans ambassador coming under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, this move to bring climate change under the Ministry of Finance to the Strategic Planning Office does not feel like it has been well coordinated. Not surprisingly, there is a separate legal climate change function in the Attorney General's office to look into the issue of Pacific climate change refugees that will cost taxpayers $50,000. We would question why the Office of the Attorney General needs to have this separate function. Any legal implications on climate change will be very much tied to the Strategic Planning Office's policy development that inevitably cascade from developments at the international climate change talks that we already participate in. International media reports state that the Paris climate change talks may consider an international climate justice tribunal. Therefore, if the Office of the Attorney General intends that this isolated legal issue on climate change is to assess international legal redress mechanisms, such as the International Court of Justice, then quite simply, this is a foreign policy matter first and foremost. These administrative tricks should not be used to mission creep for control into another government portfolio, because the list of items under the requisition this year already point to concerning trends on that front. It is also worrying, Madam Speaker, that despite the Honourable Prime Minister's statement in the UN General Assembly in September, particularly in support of SDG 14 on oceans, there is no mention of this coordination function of SDGs by the Strategic Planning Office into national plans. Neither, for that matter, does green growth, the overnight buzzword that we hear in this country now. Madam Speaker, this is out of KITA coordination driven by a communications purpose, but lagging behind on the policy front merely serves to highlight that the issues are important to the government, not because of the substantive relevance to our people, but simply because it serves another purpose, such as the government's recent desire to sit on the Human Rights Council. Earning a seat on the Human Rights Council, Madam Speaker, presiding over the UNGA must not simply be for tokenistic profile-raising purposes. If Fiji wants to take these international roles seriously and be respected for what we can offer the world, then we must lead by example. The ILO proceedings, the continued human rights violations, and ever-restrictive environments of the media all do nothing in our favor on this front. Madam Speaker, time is running against my speech, but in the long term, time is running against Fiji as well. We cannot continue to leave economic policy making to a confused government and some confused people. A government which changes their mind every time they think of a new slogan. We need policies that are clearly thought out and do not change with every new fashion that the government discovers every now and then. This is what we are asking the government to do, Madam Speaker. First, to improve its own economic management and reporting. If the budget is to be a meaningful exercise and not just a 3-hour monologue of political rhetoric, we must have facts and figures as the law requires them to be delivered to us. Second, to develop a vision of economic management. We do not mean the tired old slogans about democracy and transparency and accountability. We mean a clear vision which the government is prepared to commit to, implement consistently. Government should become fully transparent on its spending and economic policies. Budget should not be a surprise, Madam Speaker. It should be an opportunity for Parliament to critically review government policy. If the government will now remove the VAT exemption on basic food items, kerosene and prescription drugs, ensure that the poorest 60,000 households in Fiji receiving compensating cash benefits are appropriately looked at. Otherwise, Madam Speaker, many of them will be condemned to even greater poverty. The government should remember, as what I said earlier, the poor do not buy hardware. They are not buying luxury items all the time, Madam Speaker. So if you put a 9% VAT on basic food items, that's what will happen to them. They will fall further into poverty. Also, reverse the increase in STT and the imposition of the environmental levy to make up the shortfall in revenue, and protect the competitiveness of our tourism industry and the job it creates. Carefully review the tax incentives to the tourism industry. Fifth, terminate the services of COVID communication immediately and save a few $1 million and save the country from false propaganda, even if it means that the government will not look so good and may not have people to write their own speeches. Decide upon a strategy to save the sugar industry, Madam Speaker. We in the opposition are ready to help once that strategy is developed. We will need to act urgently to implement it. Why is government refusing? Why is government refusing to engage, Madam Speaker? Set up a bipartisan committee. You know, Madam Speaker, they have no plans. Like the civil service, they said they have a oral plan. They might have a oral plan for the sugar industry. They have no plans, you know. 7, Madam Speaker, review the budget for the Fiji Roads Authority and audit the work done for the last 5 years to see where we are going and what should be our priorities. Madam Speaker, we haven't seen that. Madam Speaker, I'll finish on this note. In a parliamentary system, the side which is not the government is known as the loyal opposition. We are loyal to Fiji and want the best for it. That is why we choose to sit here to make good on our promises to represent our voters. And Madam Speaker, the fact that we are here gives them credibility, allows the international community to engage with this country. If we are not here, Madam Speaker, if we don't sit in the Constitutional Officers Commission, in other independent institutions,
Order.
they will have no credibility. In fact, they are losing the credibility every day.
a strong voice. Thank you for that.
Madam Speaker, this government is losing credibility. And we are not going to sit here and be rubber stamped. We want to contribute. You know, they privately, Madam Speaker, they want us to come here and contribute because they know in their hearts and minds that we are giving them credibility. But once we are not here, Madam Speaker, the sham democracy will be exposed to the whole world. Yeah. Madam Speaker, we may differ with the government of the day on how to achieve those results. We may differ. But it is airing those differences and sharing ideas that yields the best decisions. But here we have a government who doesn't want us to share those ideas. They put obstacles at every stage, Madam Speaker, to stifle the debate, to stifle the views of our people, which are alternative to theirs. And if the government, Madam Speaker, is firm in its belief of its standing, they really have nothing to fear such a process. Madam Speaker, when people in power begin to fear about their power and fear about losing the power, they become control freaks, Madam Speaker. They become control freaks. And that is what we want to change in this country. Let's not be control freaks. Let's open up. Dissent, Madam Speaker, after all, is the highest form of patriotism. When we dissent, when we criticize, we mean good for this country. But they ought to understand that, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, they have difficulty with the idea of consultation because that is why they rejected everything. Even when we supported the bills from this side, even when we had a bill on NCD as a very apolitical bill, motion, they voted against it. They don't believe in the idea of consultation, Madam Speaker. They want to be seen as the most brilliant government this country has. After all, Madam Speaker, they cannot be seen as such. But that desire to, Madam Speaker, is really a fantasy for them. No one government, no one person has a monopoly on ideas. Madam Speaker, it may enlighten the government to learn that even I, as an economic expert, I learn from people every day. Learn from the unconventional means. Speak to the people, the ordinary people on the streets, in the tete, in the markets, in the bus, in the rice fields, sugarcane fields. As confronting as this may seem to this government, Madam Speaker, they are well advised to spend less time lecturing people and more time listening. They need more time to listen. They don't have all the answers. Indeed, as this budget shows, they seem to have very few, Madam Speaker. The economy may have surged for a while through borrowing and remittances, but we all know that this is not enough, Madam Speaker. We will need to really cut our strategy and approach. We need political reform to restore trust and faith in our people and the international community. Without this, we will be continuing to muddle through the economy. Madam Speaker, the Fiji First government should move away from its petulant politics, where it wants to win every argument and decide every point. It appears to me that once again they seek to replace me as the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, as evidence from the newspapers and the impending change in the standing order. What are they afraid of, Madam Speaker? In fact, Madam Speaker, I'll be very happy if I am pushed out through a change in standing order, because I'll be free and out of this sham process that this government wants to put forward to the people of this country and to the international community. If we want to establish genuine democracy, Madam Speaker, inclusive growth, and improve the livelihoods of families, we can help. We will not always agree, but if the government is honest about its weakness, we can help. Let us as lawmakers leave a future that our children will be proud. We need to strengthen our intangible assets, our laws on property rights, efficient law and justice systems, skills, knowledge, trust, transparency, accountability, and freedom. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, and God bless Fiji.
Thank you very much. I hope, honourable members, lessons to be learned from that speech is that we refrain from personalising your speeches, one, and two, please do not continue to make reference to an organisation, COVIS, for instance, who is not here to defend themselves. I hope we will not have to hear about that anymore. But thank you very much. Before I call on the next honourable member, I wish to remind members, for the 20-minute speeches, there will be a first warning bell at the 15-minute mark, a second warning bell at the 19-minute mark, and a final bell at 20 minutes. For the 5-minute speeches, there will be first warning bell at the 3-minute mark and a final bell at 5 minutes. I trust this is clear, and I would like to thank the whips for coming up with a strategy that would really smoothline the sessions that we're having on this budget debate. Thank you very much. I will now call on the next speaker, and I give the floor to the Honourable Rosie Akbar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, before I move my address in support of the 2016 budget, I'd also like to congratulate our Fijiana team for making it to Rio this year. A big congratulations to the Fijiana team. Madam Speaker, I'd also like to state that